Roman, thanks so much for joining me on your podcast today.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Good to be here.
You're currently the AI director at TELUS. Before we talk a little bit more about your current role and the challenges and opportunities you see associated with GenAI more widely, but then automotive specifically, let's talk a little bit more about your personal background first. You've worked with a number of exciting technology companies over the past couple of years. Let's maybe start with a brief overview of that, if that's okay.
Yeah, brilliant. And thanks again for having me here. So I started my career actually in translation, localization, working on the operational side of things, then transitioning to the commercial side of things, and kind of worked in that industry for 12 plus years, but saw the impact of machine translation and kind of the technology in that space, in that industry. So really saw, jumped at an opportunity to pivot into the world of machine learning and AI just before 2020, and joined a service provider in that space, kind of really focused on the data needed to train those systems. And now I've been in this space for 4+ years, really fast moving, very interesting, especially over the last couple of years with the boom of Gen AI. So it's a good time to be here. So now, like you mentioned, my current role is with TELUS International, soon to rebrand as TELUS Digital. And they operate as a digital customer experience innovator. They kind of craft solutions to bridge the gap between businesses and their customers. And there's four key ways that the business does that. I work within one division of that, but kind of broadly speaking, we help companies to train, test, and validate advanced artificial intelligence machine learning systems and models, and that's the division that I'm in. But there's also customer service and digital teams that then help design, build, and deliver digital and intelligent solutions, often using AI to enhance customers' experience with brands and like their journey. We then have teams that focus on like trust and safety, so they ensure like online communities are safe, engaged, and inclusive with client brands. And then finally, there's a consulting arm, which also includes a digital team who help implement robust IT solutions, so like cloud infrastructure, and make sure these are secure and work kind of 24/7. So specifically in AI data solutions, where I sit, we support companies of all sizes, from startups, OEMs to global enterprises, and we're helping to source, structure, and validate real-world data that's then used to train and test AI systems, like I mentioned. And a real focus for us is really sourcing and structuring this data ethically, paying people fairly for this, making sure the data is diverse, it's inclusive, it covers a broad spread of genders, ages, ethnicities, as an example, really helping companies try to avoid bias, as best as possible. You never will fully avoid it, but at least helping companies plan for that, in their kind of AI deployments. So when I refer to data, I'm talking about collecting and structuring data types like speech and audio for automatic speech recognition systems, text to speech, speech to text, as an example. Even working on 2D, 3D imagery for autonomous driving cars, or even in-cabin like ADAS systems, catering for DMS, driver monitoring systems, occupant monitoring systems, child presence detection in the back seats, all these features in cabin and externally for cars as well. But then it also goes as far as working on the collection and structuring of prompt and response pairs for the foundational model builders, so like large language models. So help to like fine tune those systems for kind of to avoid hallucinations, as an example. So again, it's quite broad, cover lots of different use cases, lots of different data types, but it keeps it very interesting, I have to be honest.
No, thanks so much for the overview. There are definitely loads of elements that I would come back throughout our conversation around data, model fine-tuning, and some of the use cases you've referred to. But let's maybe start a little broader. You already alluded to that you both work with and then engage more widely with a number of larger and smaller organizations across industries, really. Thinking about AI more widely, what are some of the impact and what are some of the promising use cases that you've seen organizations being able to implement successfully so far?
Yeah, so kind of where I fit in terms of like a service provider to organizations deploying AI, kind of more broadly and across multiple industries, not just automotive, you can see that it's just really increasing customer engagement, kind of their experience, their satisfaction with the brand, as well as then employees within businesses kind of using them as like productivity tools. We internally at TELUS have some really good tools to help us summarize documents, create PowerPoints, imagery, reports, for example. But then on the customer side, kind of with their customers, you're just seeing the implementation of like GenAI chatbots, conversational assistants. It's just making a bit stickier with brands where customers can ask these tools 24/7 about certain aspects of a product offering or a service, or any issues they're having. So that's really having like a big impact that I can see, and some of the stuff that we're working on for clients as well. In the automotive space, there's lots of things that's often like spoke about and in some of your previous podcasts around like enhancing operations in the manufacturing process, using it for use cases like predictive maintenance, and just because GenAI can analyze really vast amounts of data from like vehicle sensors, historical maintenance records, and even like usage patterns within that data, and then like forecast potential issues before they arise. Used in classical AI. It's nothing brand new. It's just now Gen AI is kind of really enhancing that further. We see that from some of the use cases we're working on. There's obviously lots of talk about the increases in R&D productivity, around car design, prototyping, even virtual testing and simulation, as well as supply chain optimization. And I've even seen some stuff around like roadside assistance. But I personally don't have great deal of insights or data points in that domain, and work on some of the other things. But we have been across some initiatives around helping companies use GenAI to assist like the long-term vision for fully autonomous vehicles, and how the passenger interacts with that vehicle as it drives the road. But something for me that I find most interesting, and I feel like will have the biggest impact in like the shorter amount of time compared to some of the other use cases, is around personalized driving experiences, and especially moving towards true voice control within the car in particular, which to date hasn't been fantastic. I think we can all agree. But GenAI is really going to kind of improve that in terms of its conversational capabilities. So when I think about virtual or voice assistants kind of in cabin, in car, we're talking about how the driver, as soon as they get into the car, can kind of have a personal experience of how like their sat nav set up, asking the car to play certain music, send messages, get traffic updates, and asking for route suggestions, asking for reminders of when they need to charge their electric vehicle, for example. Some of this is available today, but it's only going to improve. And the companies that can implement this, and some are trying to, quicker, are just going to create that better relationship with their customers, with their brand. Again, keep that stickiness and loyalty to their brand, and also lead to other revenue streams where people not being distracted can still drive, but can actually ask questions about nearest shops, nearest services, where's the best place to eat, order food, or park your car when you're coming to a city or a different location. And just improve that experience with the car in particular. So that for me is something that I'm, interested in, and I see a lot of people trying to kind of implement in their cars.
You already mentioned that, of course, data is fundamental to these LLMs, which are underlying some of these use cases you've just spoken about. What are some of the main challenges as it relates to data that you see currently, and maybe especially also touching on this aspect of fair and ethical sourcing of data, because it's one of the areas we haven't spoken about previously, but I think it's very important and potentially in some areas overlooked today.
Yeah, there's a real debate around kind of the quantity and the quality of data, and how some companies, well, we know kind of foundational model builders have pretty much scraped the internet and are now looking for kind of bespoke data sets that really focus in on certain use cases or domains, for example. And so now companies are coming back around, especially in the Gen AI space, about finding the right people to give the right inputs and really involving the human in that process. There's techniques like reinforcement learning with human feedback, and companies like OpenAI have shown that it really can help these systems avoid hallucinations, really steer the systems to provide kind of harmless and truthful information, because even if it's wrong, these systems are conversational in a way that it just sounds genuine and real. So the more you involve the human, in my space they call it human in the loop. As much as the human in the loop as possible, the better, really. And that's where we see the companies that we support have kind of the best results from their models. The ethical considerations, again, like I mentioned, is especially for like text-based, speech-based systems, so not computer vision so much. You want to make sure you're catering for kind of all demographics and ethnicities. So these systems are specifically powerful with English. A large proportion is just trained on English data. But now we have to think about, myself, we work within Europe, and there's many different languages in that space, and a lot of low resource languages as well. So if we truly want to make these systems available to everyone, we have to start training them on good corpuses of language data as well. It considers accents, again, genders, age groups of people as well. So it's not just working for people of our age, but people kind of later in life, the elderly. So within the data to train those systems, you have to kind of think of those people and get a broad range of inputs from all different kind of people of ethnicities and ages and across the world.
Building on that, and one of your previous points, you mentioned model fine-tuning there. First of all, what are some of the challenges as it relates to model improvements that you see, and what are some of the best practices you've seen and could share as it relates to fine-tuning models today?
Yeah, a big challenge is that it's expensive, and that's what stops a lot of people. And we're seeing a bit of an issue where foundational model builders using LLMs to fine-tune LLMs. And so in the end, we have AI systems training AI systems, which can lead to, I think, terms like model collapse. So it's a way of cutting costs, but long term, it's not going to improve things. If anything, it could degrade the accuracy of systems. So finding that balance between having enough human input, human validation, like I mentioned, some of those techniques, with using LLMs to do some things as they we see them advance. They're just getting better and better, and they are costing less and less. I think I saw some reports recently that it's like 200% cheaper now, like 2 years later, than when it was first launched. So like there is advancements and progress, but a big challenge is just trying to explain to people that we do still need human input. Humans are important. If we're ultimately using these systems and we want them to work in the real world, we need humans involved. As they advance, there'll probably be less and less of human involvement, but that's a key thing, and it has a direct impact on costs, which is kind of one of the biggest challenges that I see.
Just building on it and being really explicit, what are some of the best practices you've seen as it relates to gathering human feedback? Just really practically, what are some of the ways that model builders in this space use the human in the loop to collect and then integrate feedback?
Yeah, sorry, and I forgot you asked that question. In terms of best practices, you need some purpose-built technology. You know, TELUS have a really good platform called Fine-Tune Studio, which can visualize the outputs and obtain like inputs, like prompts from humans. But the most important piece is finding the right people to do this work. Because if you want an LLM to work well with like STEM use cases, so science, technology, engineering, and math, you need to find kind of specialists who have the right education in those spaces to provide the right inputs. You know, if I was asked to create prompts and responses or rank out, responses from an LLM related to maths, I would do terrible. And I have like my higher education. If you're looking to really do complex things that requires like some of master's level degree or even like a PhD, really advanced, you need to obviously employ those people to help you fine tune those systems for performance. And that's just like STEM. If we think about healthcare, we're talking clinicians, doctors, and any specific use case where it's very domain specific, you have to find those right people, and that's a task in itself. And not many companies can say they can do that. So there's just such demand for people with the right knowledge at the moment to kind of help train and fine tune those systems.
A really important area related to that and beyond is, of course, regulation, so things that are legally required, and there are, of course, lots of important factors that matter to stakeholders such as customers as it relates to privacy, amongst others. What are some of the important considerations that businesses need to be aware of that relates to regulation and privacy, and maybe specifically touching on one of the areas we've spoken about before, which is privacy by design?
Yeah, so it's not a division that I'm involved with, but within TELUS, they've actually deployed a customer support tool that has been certified to privacy by design. I think the ISO certification is, I have to just check my notes, it is referred to as ISO 31700, and they went through a whole process where it was externally audited. And to do that, they had to obviously consider all the privacy, data protection concerns, because it is a customer-facing tool as well, deployed into our parent company, which is a Canadian telecommunications company. So that a whole process went into place into implementing the right guardrails. So using kind of some of the most powerful LLMs out there from the foundational model builders, but additionally implementing additional guardrails, and going that extra step in terms of fine tuning, even using techniques like red teaming, where you're paying effectively like hackers, people that know how to jailbreak things, to really stress test these systems before it's then pushed out to the public. Because we've seen in the news, I think it was United Airlines, where they just pushed something out and people then were asking it, crazy questions about creating bombs and stuff like that, and it was actually giving them responses. So that is just something that a lot of companies are worried about externalizing these things, making them customer facing because of those issues. So you really have to design it in a way and put the right guardrails in place, like I mentioned, to avoid those scenarios. Yeah.
Building on that, lots of automotive incumbents are inherently risk averse for good reason. They're really scared about their reputation, and we've already seen with some of the external LLM solutions where developers have posted confidential code in some of these, especially, of course, ChatGPT amongst others, that then have been made public. And what I would be really curious to get your thoughts on is around some of the use cases that you believe we will see over sort of the next maybe five years or so. It's probably quite hard to look beyond that, just in terms of how you believe this will sort of evolve as a landscape in automotive specifically over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the bit that I find a bit more achievable right now is the in-cabin assistant. And we even see companies like TomTom, like the mapping provider,
Mm.
who have implemented some like conversational voice assistant offerings. We have Mercedes with like their Hey Mercedes better program using ChatGPT, and I think that they mentioned it's across like 900,000 cars. So that is thing that's been worked on now. So in the next kind of 5 years, I think we'll have a fully personalized experience in the car, and I feel like that is kind of near. Maybe in the next couple of years, I can see that happening. There is the challenge around the connectivity of a car. It's not like a computer that can easily access kind of cloud infrastructure. So that needs to be solved, and there's some clever things happening. But with the advancements of like, I think they call them small language models now. So you have your large language models, obviously requires a lot of compute, but they're condensing these down into small language models that can do equally very impressive things, but can be implemented on like a portable device. So it'd be easy to have that within the car itself. You'd have to find a way that it then connects and updates when you get home or something to your Wi-Fi. But that is things I feel that really will happen in the next kind of 5 years. And then a lot of the back office stuff that all companies are trying to do to kind of optimize things. There's companies using, I see a lot of pilots and tests, but no one really set on what they're going to do in that space for those kind of back office things. But the conversational aspect, the voice assistants, and things like that, and supporting customers actually as well online, are visible now, and will be implemented, I feel, in kind of the next 5 years.
Mm. What capabilities do you believe are currently still underrepresented within some of these big automotive companies that they should seek to internalize that might become even more important in the future?
Yeah, it's a slightly out of kind of my experience and what I do, but from stuff that I've seen kind of online, the whole car design, prototyping, coming up with more innovation and different ways of thinking, I feel like is still a bit untapped. I'm sure there's lots of people within the OEMs or car makers that are kind of testing these things. But it'd be great to have these systems provide more kind of options of things that we would never consider ourselves, just because as humans we have limited space for kind of new concepts. Whereas these systems, it could be unlimited, and especially in the world of like diffusion models where it's like generative image based things. So I feel like there's going to be more potentially wild and wackier concepts around cars, even just mobility in general, and how the future might look will really be that kind of dystopian world of flying cars and autonomous, real autonomous driving vehicles. Yeah.
Actually, shameless plug here. I've spoken to someone in the air mobility space the other week.
Nice.
So there's
Yeah.
another episode on that. But to wrap this conversation up as a final question, if you would imagine you're talking to some of the leaders, you're probably doing this anyway, but in charge of these data and AI business units within some of these incumbent manufacturers and potentially the wider automotive and mobility ecosystem, what are some of the main recommendations you would make that they should seek to implement over the coming years to maximize the value from Gen AI in their organizations?
Yeah. But something I say to kind of partners and people that I work with is that you don't have to wait until your data is perfect, but you do need to organize and make it robust enough and think about the use case to start with, and then see what you have today, and then obviously supplement that with some new data sources if you don't have enough. That question around quantity and quality is really crucial. You have to kind of agree on what accuracy you're happy with. If it's not 100%, where you could focus your efforts and what is actually achievable. And the businesses that kind of I've worked with in my time in this space, that have had the most success are those that understand what the systems can but also can't do. They go beyond like the shiny demos, because we've all played with ChatGPT, for example, and it reached C-suite, which is great because it's now got visibility. But it's still kind of a toy, still playing with it. When it comes to actually implementing that within an organization, is very different, because you have to think of the privacy. But you have to think past the shiny demo and think about the potential impact on the business, and if you can get some metrics behind what impact that could make, that really will put you in a good foot to actually succeed and actually deploy things within our industry. And from what we see and things I've seen in kind of my just under 5 years in this space, only like 20% of AI projects actually make it to production. There's so many pilots and tests made. So you think like 80% of data scientists, machine learning teams' time is effectively wasted by not really thinking about the bigger picture and just trying these pilots. So there just needs to be a bit more planning and a bit more engagement cross company as well, across departments. And if you're looking to implement some AI into a certain function in a business, involve those people in that process and the conversation, get their input, and have them explain, what will make the biggest impact. And then, refer it back to, what is the ROI, what financial impact might it have? Because that ultimately is what's going to move the needle the most, in optimizing processes. And then just for on the ethical consideration side of things, like I touched on before, for these systems to work in the real world, we need human in the loop. We need it to cater for everyone. We need that diversity, and we want to just try and mitigate bias and hallucinations in the world of LLMs as much as possible.
Thanks so much, Roman, for joining me today. That's been a fascinating, super insightful conversation. It's really appreciated.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fabian. Thanks again for having me.